Hello, everyone. My name is Manjo Oyson, and I am your unit coordinator for this unit, Governance and Business Law. Allow me to welcome you to our unit. As we start the term, and hopefully it's a Monday for you, this is a good opportunity for us to kind of cover what we hope to be doing in this particular unit and to talk about what you will hopefully be able to learn by completing this unit, as well as for us to be able to have a discussion, a slight discussion about what the topics that will be covered in our unit. So in this introductory podcast, I will talk about what the unit is about. We will also talk about the learning outcomes for this unit. I shall also spend time talking about the unit delivery, who the teaching team is. We'll also talk about the reading list and the study guide. We'll talk about assessments, and my request that you go through the unit profile as well as the Moodle site and familiarize yourself with the content of both the unit profile as well as the Moodle site. And then I'd also encourage you to have a look at some of the key university policies, particularly pertaining to those on plagiarism and academic misconduct, as well as the one about behavioral misconduct. And then finally, before, at the end of this introductory podcast, I'd like to direct your attention as well to the first online tutorial that we will be having about 3 weeks from today. So let's begin by talking about this particular unit about governance and business law. The first thing that you should observe is that this isn't just a unit about governance. A lot of you would have heard about governance, and I'll talk more about governance in a short while. But this isn't just about governance, it also talks about business law. Traditionally, governance is a unit that is discussed and taught on its own, and business law is a separate topic of its own. And yet we've combined two very important fields in just a single unit, which would actually mean that we are trying to have a wide coverage of key topics pertaining to governance and business law. And for the purpose, therefore, of going deeper into some of these areas about governance or business law, I will have to leave it to you to dig deeper into this, although we will likely have an opportunity to dig deeper into some of these key concepts, but we certainly will not be able to address a lot of the intricacies about business law, because business law is a broad field, as we will shortly see. So let's begin by talking about governance for now. And to a lot of you, governance would have become a concept, an idea that is quite familiar, especially because when we had the global financial crisis starting in 2008, there was a lot of discussion, both in Australia and abroad, that it was failures particularly in corporate governance, that caused the collapse of a lot of key businesses, and which resulted, therefore, in a lot of people losing their life savings, losing their jobs, and in the case of the United States, for example, having to bail out a lot of these companies, which was really surprising at that time. And you then begin to wonder, to a great extent, what caused the collapse of these businesses? And that is one of the key purposes of having a look at governance, because governance essentially is about those systems, mechanisms, and frameworks by which authority is exercised and controlled in many companies. So we look at for example, we talk about governance structures, how it is governed. So we look at structures, we look at authority. And as we go through the unit, therefore, we then begin to see that whilst there is a separate legal entity, such as a limited liability company, which we will just address as a company for the purpose of our discussion of this unit, that business entity is separate, obviously, from its owners, who are the shareholders. But the company itself, or the business structure, would have as its governance mechanism, you have the directors who actually wield the authority and the power within the company. And then you have the managers who are actually meant to be directed by the board of directors. And it is the board of directors that will determine what the policies will be of the company. They make the crucial decisions for the company, although it is the managers who make the day-to-day decisions of a firm. And you will later on see that there is a problem, because on the one hand, because there is an asymmetry of information. Information oftentimes is not known to the directors, in the sense that because it is the managers who are aware of what goes on in the firm day by day, it is possible for them, therefore, to try to conceal a lot of this information so that the directors don't know what is going on. And before they know it, the directors realize that the business is experiencing major problems. So that is what is typically known in the legal literature as the agency problem. So the directors are compelled to assign and surrender some of their powers by leading it to the managers, especially the chief executive officer, for example, and his group of other senior managers, to make the day-to-day decisions in behalf of the firm and to actually operate the firm. So there is an asymmetry of information. But at the same time, there is another agency problem in the sense that ultimately the directors are meant to be accountable, not really to the managers or to the employees, because it is the managers and the employees who actually are accountable to the directors, but the directors themselves are accountable to the shareholders of the firm or those who own shares in the company. And we realize, especially for those of course of us who have been exposed to the capitalist system, that without the shareholders, without the investors, it would be very difficult for companies to grow because they would need capital. And it is the investors who typically provide the equity and the capital for the firm, which would allow it to be able to be established in the first place or for it to grow. And so therefore, because there was a time when the owners of the company or the shareholders or the equity owners were themselves the ones who ran the firm. But as we know now, given the public companies that we know of, when we speak of public companies, these are typically the ones which might be listed in the stock exchange. We realize that there is a huge disconnect between who the owners of the firm are and the directors of the firm. So whilst it is the owners of the firm, the shareholders, who might elect and choose who the directors will be, ultimately, the directors by themselves as a body are separate, and they do make decisions regardless of what the shareholders really say. And that, again, raises another agency problem, because although the owners would like to wield control of the firm, that simply can't be done because there are too many of them, and obviously the owners can have their own separate and distinct interests. And the directors, therefore, are given the duty of making decisions that will promote the best interests of the company and not necessarily of the shareholders themselves. And as we see later on, therefore, we realize that when we talk about what the main obligation is of the directors, should it be towards the shareholders or should it be towards the company as a separate legal entity? Should it be towards the employees? And we realize that these are in fact key issues that we speak about when we talk about governance. So it is a crucial point. So on the one hand, when we talk about corporate governance, we've talked about the importance of corporate governance because it led to a lot of problems we encountered in the past about failures of corporate governance, because you then realize that there were a lot of corporate collapses that happened because directors failed to provide the proper oversight, which allowed the managers, therefore, to just make profits and take huge business risks that actually put the survival of the firm at stake. But on the other hand, another key issue in corporate governance really relates to the question of whose interests should directors promote. And as I have pointed out already, typically we understand that that responsibility of directors is actually towards the shareholders. But it is not that simple, because as we realize, we need to wonder, do directors owe certain duties towards employees? And do they owe duties as well, both legal and ethical duties, not only towards the employees, but to stakeholders or those who are not shareholders of the firm? For example, do they owe duties to creditors? Do they owe duties to communities? Do they owe duties to the environment? Do they owe duties to the government? Do they owe duties to the public, to the stakeholders, therefore? And some of you would have heard about the discourse concerning corporate social responsibility. So this is, again, another key area we talk about in this unit the idea about whose interests are directors meant to promote in undertaking their legal responsibilities as part of company law. So what we hope, therefore, to do is that, and in relation, therefore, to this unit, we talk about governance on the one hand, and we will also have a chance to look at public governance as it relates to the public field, whether it's the Commonwealth government or it could be the operation of public enterprises in states. But at the same time, when we talk about business law, we will then try to cover such topics as Australian contracts law. So we'll talk about the importance of contracts and whether or not, when there seems to be an agreement between two individuals or two parties, they actually formed a contract that is binding in law. We also talk about Australian consumer law and whatever guarantees there are that protect consumers from the viewpoint of law. We also talk about tort as a separate source of legal obligation, even in the absence of a contract or even in the absence of an agreement between parties. We will also address the responsibility of firms and of directors and managers towards their employees. And in doing so, as part of business law, we talk about employment and industrial relations, and we talk about hiring practices, rules about employment, and we talk about occupational health and safety. We talk as well about the requirements concerning anti-discrimination and so on. And after we would have talked about governance, therefore, in the first 6 weeks of the unit, and then we spend 2 weeks talking about contracts and torts, and then we spend another 2 weeks talking about employment and industrial relations. We then end the unit by looking at what goes on internationally, so adopting an international perspective. And there, we examine what is going on internationally, because as you would have known, what goes on abroad affects you. And for example, the problem about what is going on right now, topically, is that the United States government, for example, through President Donald Trump, has decided to impose tariffs on China, and that will have implications because China will retaliate. And that raises the question, is that permitted, even given that there is a World Trade Organization, which is meant to encourage free trade and economic liberalization? So that is the first question that we need to address. And are there, therefore, instances when states, and when I talk about states, I'm talking about what we typically call as nation states or countries, are states actually permitted to impose tariffs? And we would have thought that they disappeared because of the presence of the World Trade Organization. So we talk about that. We also look at what is going on internationally as a result of the internet, social media, as well as trade liberalization and economic liberalization. We look in particular at the World Trade Organization as well as the Marrakesh Agreement, which is the treaty or the international convention that established the WTO. And we also look at some international corporate governance mechanisms. And so therefore, what we would therefore see is that when we have this particular unit, we look at governance essentially both domestically as well as internationally, and also look at key aspects of business law, so that ultimately you as managers, as employees, or even perhaps directors of certain businesses are in a better position to understand what your legal duties might be, given certain legal regimes, both domestically and internationally. And so therefore, you are in a better position to undertake responsibilities. You're in a better position to know what your responsibilities might be towards shareholders, towards directors, towards yourselves, towards employees, what your responsibilities might be towards consumers, what your responsibilities might be towards other stakeholders. So that gives you a broad view about governance, and then you have an idea about what goes on internationally as well. So in terms of the unit learning outcomes, therefore, on successful completion of this unit, we'll then be able to assess and evaluate the key aspects of the legal systems that operate in Australia and internationally, and their impact on the operation of organizations within different legal jurisdictions. You should also be able to analyze critically the legal issues that confront organizations and managers and explain the legal risks associated with key management decisions. You should also be able to assess and evaluate the specific legislation that governs managers' and leaders' actions within organizations as they relate to employment, anti-discrimination, occupational health and safety, as well as consumer law. You should also be able to analyze corporate governance frameworks that organizations need to employ to successfully manage business activity to minimize legal risks, and evaluate the role of law in enabling an organization to achieve its corporate goals through strategies that are socially responsible, sustainable, and ethical. Now, let's talk about the delivery of these units. So I've already told you that there are at least 4 key areas that we look at in this particular unit. We'll talk about corporate and public governance. We talk about consumer law and torts. We talk about employment and industrial relations. And then we adopt an international perspective on governance initiatives, international bribery and corruption, and the World Trade Organization and international trade. And as you would have known by now, this is a brand new unit that was developed to strengthen our MBA program and to expose you as MBA students to important areas of governance as well as business law, so that you can better undertake and accomplish your professional responsibilities. And because of the broad coverage of topics in this unit, it will require, and it is a good thing that we have assembled a team of experts from the School of Business and Law to actually co-teach this unit. And so in terms of the teaching team, therefore, you have me as your unit coordinator, and I'll be taking charge of most of the topics, particularly on corporate governance and public governance, as well as on consumer law. And Associate Professor Michael Segon, who is your MBA director, will also be spending time with me to talk about part 3 of corporate and public governance, as well as the one on international perspectives. And then in relation to the discussion and the tutorials pertaining to employment and industrial relations, we have Professor Julian Teicher, who is our Deputy Dean for Research in the School of Business and Law, as well as Gordon Stewart, to be the ones who will be delivering that particular topic. So that is our teaching team. Now, if you've had the chance to go through the unit profile and the Moodle, our Moodle site, and I assume you would have done that because you're watching this video recording, you would have seen that I have already uploaded the reading list and the PDF, at least of the suggested readings for weeks 1 to 6. And you would have observed as well that there is no prescribed textbook for this unit, particularly for a very practical reason, given that you have governance, which typically for most people talks about corporate governance or in the private sector. You can also have a public governance. These 2 fields alone would have required 2 separate textbooks. And then when you talk about contracts would have required a separate textbook. Torts would have required a separate textbook. The discussion about employment and industrial relations would require another textbook. And the one about international perspectives, especially pertaining, for example, to a discussion about World Trade Organization or about world trade, it will again require a separate textbook. So instead of requiring you to end up purchasing multiple textbooks for the unit, we've decided not to have a prescribed textbook, but instead to rely on reading lists, which would give you a good sense of what the pertinent topics will be. However, in relation to corporate and public governance, at least in relation to corporate governance, it will be beneficial for you to actually have a look at the prescribed, it's not really a prescribed textbook, but the textbook that we will mainly rely on for the purpose of covering parts 1 to 3 of this unit on corporate and public governance, which is the textbook by Bob Tricker on corporate governance. The study guides would also have been available by this week. So you could start having a look at the study guides, which will give you a basic idea of what the key concepts are pertaining to corporate and public governance, at least parts 1 to 3. At the same time, I would also encourage you to have a look at the assessments. And if you will notice in our Moodle site, there are 3 key assessments. We have a presentation for 30%, a report for 35%, and a practical assessment for 35%. So I would encourage you to go over them in detail so that you know what the assessment tasks are and what the due dates are. And take note that the first assessment is due on week 8, or the 7th of September 2018. And the presentation, which comprises 30%, and the report are actually very related to each other, because what we ask you to do is to have a look at a specific organization and then undertake one of the assessment tasks as described in the assessment tasks profile. So you have an opportunity, therefore, to have a broad and an in-depth look at a specific organization, which hopefully is the one you're working with or you're working for, and for you to be able to analyze what is going on in your business and make an informed analysis and evaluation from the viewpoint of corporate governance or public governance, as well as business law. And in particular, when we speak about business law, it could be about the implications of contracts, the implications about torts. It could be about employment and industrial relations. And then finally, the final assessment is going to be a practical assessment. And I encourage you, therefore, to have a look at the practical assessment as described in the unit profile, as well as in our Moodle site, which involves a hypothetical business case. Now, what you would then realize is that when we have the assessments for this unit, we've adopted an approach that is more practical oriented, in the sense that you're actually given an opportunity to use concepts that you've learned from this unit and apply them to your business. So in that case, after you complete this unit, you emerge out of this unit having this toolkit of ideas and knowledge and concepts, which you can freely apply to your businesses or wherever you're working in, so that you become more informed and knowledgeable managers. And so that's the assessment. And then I encourage you to go through the unit profile and the Moodle site. And in particular, I also encourage you to have a look at the rules on plagiarism and academic misconduct, which are also in our Moodle site. I also encourage you to have a look at student behavioral misconduct, because there are certain norms of conduct that students are meant to observe in terms of the way that they relate with each other, as well as the way they relate with the teachers of this unit. And then I also encourage you to have a look at the useful tips and learning support, which are also found in our Moodle site. So finally, I'd like us to also just have a look at the online tutorial. So what will happen is that we will have an online tutorial once every 2 or 3 weeks. And so therefore, our first tutorial will not occur until about 2 weeks from now. And when we have our first tutorial, it will be on part 1 of the topic on corporate and public governance. And I'd like you to send me a feedback on whether or not you would prefer the first online tutorial to happen on the 27th of July, Friday, from 6 to 8 p.m. Queensland time, or whether or not it should be on a Saturday from 3 to 5 p.m. Queensland time. And we need to be aware that this is a small class of about 6 or 7 students at this point, but we have 2 or 3 who actually don't live in Australia at this time. They live abroad, so there could be problems about the time difference. And so please provide me a feedback by email if you prefer it to be the 27th of July or the 28th of July. Now, if it is difficult for us to reach a consensus as to the best time for the tutorial, for the first tutorial at least, then we shall hold it on the 27th of July, Friday, from 6 to 8 p.m. At that tutorial, we shall also talk about when we should be holding our succeeding tutorials, so that we know in advance that when we should be meeting again. So having had this introductory podcast, I would then encourage you to begin thinking about, what you can learn as a result of knowing about governance and business law. And in completing this unit, how closer you will be to earning an MBA from Central Queensland University. So with that, or with the many things that I've said, I welcome you again to our unit. Please do not hesitate to send me an email or even call me by mobile phone, which is 0434-375-724, and I actually have it in the Moodle site as well. Feel free to send me an email, give me a phone call, and I look forward to engaging you, and I look forward as well to helping out and facilitating the learning journey that you're going through. And see you soon. Bye.